One thing I've learned over the span of my career is that you must build the team that has integrity and that is really strong in terms of influencing others within the organization, right? So obviously you need technical skill sets, that goes without saying, but you must have integrity and you must be able to demonstrate to your leadership, to your executive board, that you really can speak the business lingo. Things like copying and pasting prevention, data masking based on what URL you land on, and upload and download prevention, where you can upload to, where you cannot download to. Also RBI components for browser isolation. If the site is potential have risk indicators, you can just detonate in a browser isolation in a sandbox of some sort. Those are all really, really good enterprise features that I think a lot of CISOs are starting to think about, because let's face it, browser is where the biggest attack surface is, other than phishing, which is probably on top of the list. Being able to connect with your team outside, besides the work day to day, being able to find the time to bring the teams, if they're remote, at least once or twice a year, and hopefully more often, to do some team building activities. I think it's a great way of bonding and really getting to know each other, and it also relieves stress and makes people feel like they belong to a higher purpose.
Hi, Aamir. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Aleksandra. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I just want to introduce you to our listeners, who you are, what you do. So Aamir Niazi is actually an executive director and CISO at SMBC Capital Markets. And he has over 18 years of experience in cybersecurity. So I'm sure you have a lot of advice for aspiring professionals. And you work in so many other companies, KPMG, CLS Group, and many more. And you also have extensive experience in everything you'd expect a CISO to have: cloud security, regulatory compliance, risk management, so many things. So I'm really excited for this conversation. And I think the best way to start it is just to know, how did you get into this space in the first place? What inspired you to go into cybersecurity?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Back in the day when I was doing my undergrad and I started working in IT as systems engineer, this was before I got into security. I think that was around 2007, 2008 timeframe. I had to take a step back and really think what I wanted to do for life. And back then, not a lot of schools were offering, cybersecurity degrees, and I happened to come across Colorado Tech and started and basically enrolled in that program. After I had done that, I got my first break with my CISO at the time at NBC Universal, Jonathan Chow. Amazing boss. Every now and then I still stay in touch with him. Well, he started mentoring me because I had reached out to him stating, listen, I want to get into cybersecurity, and I guide me through that. So he mentored me for a while I was a systems engineer on the infrastructure side, and eventually got an opportunity to step into cybersecurity in his team at NBC Universal, and the rest is history. So, one really good thing I learned from that is that, having a really good leader and a boss really does change your career trajectory. So I'm lucky enough to have had him as a boss. So that's how I got started, basically.
Yeah, I think having a good mentor really can shape the trajectory of your whole career, where you end up and to what extent you really like a certain field. Because I'm sure a lot of people out there, let's say they didn't have a supportive mentor, they might have not chosen this career. And you yourself, you've been in so many industries. You've been in media, consulting, financial services. What lessons did you learn from leading in different sectors in media, consulting, financial services? What do you think were the key differences and the commonalities when it comes to cyberspace?
A lot of regulatory driven requirements exist in financial sector, obviously, because we're a critical infrastructure. So the scrutiny is very high from the regulators and also, generally from bad actors. So I would say across all of those sectors, financial services is where probably the most investment is in cybersecurity. So as a result of that, you tend to have a lot of robust controls compared to the other sectors that I've been in personally.
And I can imagine as part of financial industry that gets really targeted by a lot of threat actors. What do you think are some of the gaps that many cyber leaders still underestimate that needs to be covered?
There are quite a lot. That's a loaded question, but there's obviously a lot of talk about identity as the new perimeter and zero trust architecture, right? So a lot of folks talk about that, but what does it really mean, right? It's a journey. It's not really an end goal, right? Zero trust, you build based on your identity. So your identity perimeter has to be really strong. Your controls around how you manage identity and how do you validate identity on a continuous basis is really the key. So I think that's a really big emerging topic. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to state the obvious of AI and machine learning. Everybody is talking about that. I think that's inevitable. Everybody is eventually going to have to learn AI and machine learning, regardless to be. But how do you implement that in your security organization? What is it that you're trying to get out of it? There's a lot of good use cases from SOC perspective, really reducing the time to detection, time to remediation. But in general, I think identity protection and identity as a service, or just your overall identity strategy has to be really sound. And I think a lot of people and a lot of organizations actually struggle through that. Just because either lack of resources or not really setting the right tone in terms of where they want to be.
And what is it for you to set the right tone, right? How do you ensure that right tone setting, at least at your position?
So really, you have to define where you want to be, and you have to assess where you are today, right? So really taking a very close look at your identity ecosystem, basically, within your organization, and understanding what the regulatory requirements are, what is driving that, and where those gaps are. Once you identify the gaps, then you can take strategic steps to execute on those on that mission. But you must have a right team, right? I mean, one thing I've learned over the span of my career is that you must build the team that has integrity and that is really strong in terms of influencing others within the organization, right? So, obviously you need technical skill sets, that goes without saying, but you must have integrity and you must be able to demonstrate to your leadership, to your executive board, that you really can speak the business lingo, right? You can really explain to them what the business risks are and how to overcome those risks in business terms. If you can do that, I think you can really take your organization forward. But I think that's really what it comes down to for the most part.
Yeah, I think if I sort of can draw from what you just said, I think some of the most important qualities out there is integrity, humility, and being able to drive the business case. Does any particular example come to mind when you think of this? Because I'm sure you face some situations that you thought, okay, this is the situation where I see a certain person expressing integrity or humility within the space. Because at the end of the day, we are working with people.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was fortunate enough in my current role to build a team from two to almost 20 people over the span of, 5 or so years.
Mm.
And I'm not going to lie, this is not always, roses and sunshines, right? You make mistakes and you have to learn from them. I made mistakes. Unfortunately, I ended up hiring a couple of, not very trustworthy individuals and had to let them go. But
Mm.
that is part of becoming a leader, right? So, but I had more wins than losses, and I'm
Mm.
really proud of what I've built at my current organization to be able to lead really good individuals. And
Mm.
since COVID, things have changed a lot, right? This remote workforce has basically forced us to work remotely and really, so you don't have that a lot of day-to-day interaction, which is
Mm.
also which can cause a lot of confusion. So I really press on my guys to have that very close interaction, not just professionally but also personally. Really get to know them, and just
Mm.
not always talk about work. Find a time to really connect. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I actually love the fact that you touch upon not only the rosy, dozy stuff, but also the negative aspects of the security space. Because I feel a lot of people like to romanticize the whole space, but as you mentioned, there are so many things that go wrong, and COVID, especially, I think, led us to a situation where you sometimes don't even know who you're working with. Let's say someone was hired remotely, right? How do you build this from ground up, right? You said you built from 2 people to are now 20 people. Um, let's say someone is gonna knock on your door and ask, "Hey, I want to be part of your team." What should they say to appeal to you?
I think just from the personality traits perspective, like I said, you have to show integrity and you have to show that you are willing to learn and adapt to change, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I'm keeping technical skills set completely aside right now. I'm just talking about
Yeah.
personality traits, right? So if you can demonstrate to me that you really value integrity and you are a person of integrity, and you can really you're committed to learning and growing in the field, I think, and you can actually demonstrate that, whether it's you putting in a time on a side project where you built something and you can actually demonstrate that, look, I was doing this job, but at the time, because I am so interested in this field, this is what I've done, this is what I've learned, and here's a demonstration of it, or a project
Hmm.
portfolio of it. I think that goes a long way to share, and I think that's the approach I took back when I got mentored with my back then CISO.
Hmm.
I was doing a lot of work in my home lab, and because I came from infrastructure background, it wasn't that difficult for me to pick up on certain things. But there are true, genuine, intelligent people who don't have to have an IT background, who don't have to have a security background to be able to get in. I think we in this space need diversity as much as any other space. I think we can really use the skills that people have developed over the course of their lifetimes in completely different fields, who would
Hmm.
be fantastic in cybersecurity. So
Yeah. I know this is not one of the questions that I shared, but you shared about how you started your journey, and I just wonder what right now excites you. The space is constantly developing, and I'm sure everyone has their own niche. But what excites you when there are so many attacks originating today? What are you passionate about in this space?
oh yeah. That's
Very loaded.
that is a loaded question for sure. I mean, there are a lot of really great emerging tech coming out.
Mm.
Obviously, browser security is being one of them.
Mm.
The enterprise secure browser, what we call, I guess that's a Gartner lingo, perhaps, or
Mm.
um, CSPM space is really something that I was really intrigued in when the likes of
Mm.
Viz came out back then, and we were
Mm.
able to just get that central visibility across multi clouds. That was really good to see. So, in terms of
Mm.
my passion, I think I'm really passionate about building strong teams. That is one thing that I think will take you places as a leader as you step in from a practitioner or security practitioner to being a leader. If you can build a strong team to back you up, you will, chances are very high that you will be successful, right? So that's what I hold that very near and dear to my heart. I hope I do justice to being an empathetic leader. But from the technology standpoint, I think the space around the CSPM and zero trust, and obviously now, like I said, AI is the hype today. So I am no expert by any means within AI and machine learning, but I am very interested in learning that space. Had the pleasure of speaking to really good, well-known leaders in that space, and really helping me break down AI components and the risks around AI components. So those are 2 or 3 key areas that I'm really, really interested in learning more and more about.
And I'm sure having a strong team really would help with this. If you have the team that is excited to learn about new tech, teach you about the new tech, I think it's super exciting. And since we are speaking about so many new tools, so many technologies, we know that employees do spend most of the time today on the browser, right? What are your thoughts on securing the browser? And since it's becoming one of the biggest attack surface areas out there.
Yeah, that is definitely an emerging trend, right? I mean, look, a typical browser is not considered an enterprise browser by any means, right? Which is why this space is really coming up big time. We looked at a few different tools. I think the biggest risks around just using typical browsers is not being able to control what a user cannot do, not being able to tie that activity to an identity or IDP provider, for example. So a lot of those enterprise controls don't work. But now with the emerging tech in that space, we are seeing we can tie those type of applications or browser usage to an enterprise IDP, and you can do really cool things around managing the extensions and checking the risk score of the extensions and what permissions the extensions are given, and also really create or craft your policies from the DLP standpoint a lot quicker and faster compared to traditional DLP controls. Now, the only thing is, there are players out there that are moving from just enterprise browser and controlling the actions within the browser to and moving that over to the OS level with hooks into the kernel and things like that. So my guess is that hopefully over time that will give the traditional DLP providers a hard time, right? Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting space, and we are excited, and we're looking at a few things.
Yeah, and I think DLP is especially a big use case for a company as yours, right? It's very sensitive.
Like you said, things like copying and pasting prevention, data masking, based on what URL you land on, and upload and download prevention, where you can upload to, where you cannot download to. Also RBI components for browser isolation. If the site is potential have risk indicators, you can just detonate in a browser isolation in a sandbox of some sort. Those are all really, really good enterprise features that I think a lot of CISOs are starting to think about, because let's face it, browser is where the biggest attack surface is, other than phishing, which is probably on top of the list.
And I wonder, how did you approach towards DLP change, since the emergence of all the AI tools that make it very easy to make emails and anything else?
financial industry is a little bit very stringent on what to allow, what not to allow. So a lot of our next gen firewall vendors do allow you to sort of categorize your traffic based on the categories that they have defined, but it's obviously not, those things can be bypassed, or, there's always emerging tech or emerging new websites coming up that may not be categorized right away. And so, there are some cool controls that you can do with secure browser technologies, where you can say, hey, I want to only allow this site and nothing else, right? So you can do that, and I guess you can do that with the traditional firewalls too. But I think the new tech gives you a little bit more granular control, because your session is tied to your identity at all times. So you can log in, you can do cool things like, hey, I'm going to step up the user if the site is really sensitive, or prompt the user every hour, or anything, something like that. So
yeah. And right now, as you said, like, a lot of security leaders are focused on granularity of control that you can now have in place. How invisible do you think should real tech be today? Because some people say if it is too invisible to end user, maybe there is not enough security tools in place, and vice versa. What do you think about it?
I think it's important to make sure that the user community is educated, but it's also critically important that we allow, with our emerging tech or new tools, to make their lives easier. So I think a lot of attention needs to be paid in terms of user experience in those tools. Make it very easy for them, or almost native to a typical browser, but in the background allow them to see all the things that you're doing very easily. I think that would go a long way. But again, the knowledge campaigns are really critical for when and anytime you're rolling out or doing change management in the organization. So you must have a really good plan around that, because otherwise, people will get angry and they will be like, hey, why do I have a new browser on my endpoint? I am okay with Edge. But it's also providing that business and risk benefit to them, right? So put it in the context of, hey, this is what we're reducing from risk exposure perspective, which we were not doing very well before. So I think those are some of the things that are really, really important for our user experience.
Yeah, and since you've been in financial industry for quite some years right now, what do you think are the most effective ways to get buy-in for cybersecurity tools and initiatives?
It's all about demonstrating your risk posture, or your risk, where the risk is, to your leadership, and how does that impact the overall picture of your organization, right? How does it impact you financially, reputationally? And again, as a security leader, you must be very well adept to business and boardroom lingo, right? You must not use very technical jargon. Look, this is not new. We've heard it from every single security practitioner out there, right? You must be able to communicate in clear and simple terms the risks to your board in business terminology, rather than throwing technical jargons. So if you can demonstrate that, and you can tie that to business value of what you're trying to do and how you're going to reduce the risk, more often than not, you will get a nod from the management to say, yes, it makes sense. The other thing I'd like to just add is that the board and the management wants to see what the peers are doing in that vertical, wherever industry you may be in. How are they handling those risks, and how are they reducing their risk in the same vertical? And then obviously tying that back to the recent breaches. If you have a competitor who recently had a breach because of that weak control, and your plan and strategy includes that control as part of reducing your risk posture, then I think those type of conversations go a long way in getting the buy-in from leadership.
I think peer comparison is definitely one of the strongest strategies because whether we are in school, university, there is always peer comparison that you cannot avoid. And then same comes with cybersecurity. If you see someone getting breached, then that's probably should be on top of your mind. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, a lot of companies, unfortunately, at times face budgeting cuts, right? And then oftentimes cybersecurity can be affected. What frameworks do you use to help prioritize security investments?
Your security strategy needs to be tied to a framework, but also what regulators are looking to, I guess, what regulatory landscape is driving, right? Um, so it becomes really critical for you to prove the value that what you're trying to achieve is what it's going to reduce. So, I mean, just tools aside, you need to look for where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, right? Where are you going to drop the biggest amount of risk across your organization by implementing a process or tool, strategy around wherever that space may be. So if you can bring in a new tool and get rid of 3 or 4 other tools, and show the value of what those other tools are doing. So, see, one of the problems that we have typically is that we bring in a lot of tools, but we don't really get the most juice out of them. They're doing maybe, if a tool can do 70% of the thing, maybe we're just doing 25% of something specific, and then because of the maybe lack of resources or not having full engineering teams, or you're not building over time the capability that tool allows you to have, and then a few years later you have now new emerging tech that kind of can cover what you were doing with that tool plus a lot more. So you have to continuously assess your what we call tool rationalization, right? What you have, what can you bring in, and hopefully reduce maybe 3 or 4 other tools in the environment. So again, just going back and tying the knot, really showing the value you can bring by implementing a tool, and reducing the attack surface by X, right? I think if you can put that with some quantification, that goes a long way of hopefully getting a buy-in.
That makes sense. I think it's also responsibility of a vendor to make the whole value proposition as transparent as possible, because with so many things, right? Security leaders are overwhelmed and over bombarded with so much information, and if you cannot share the whole value that you're bringing to the table, then it makes it a little harder on your side.
That's why it becomes really critical for, I guess, security practitioners to start with a use case. What is it that you're trying to solve? To start there and then expand your use cases to say, okay, and then continuously do assessment on what you already have to see, okay, can this tool do this? Can that tool do this? Why am I looking at a new thing? What is it that I'm trying to achieve that I already don't have, right? So if you're bringing in an AppSec tool as an example, you might already have some AppSec tools that may or may not support X, Y, or Z in your pipelines, and you can say, hey, I'm looking at this new thing that can do all of those things that those tools are not doing, so I can reduce my hopefully the spend and total cost of ownership as well, by getting rid of those tools and bringing in something that's really more robust. But I think starting with the right problem is key to making progress.
Definitely. And what do you think is another loaded question? But what do you think is a typical cybersecurity myth or misconception that most business leaders you wish would understand correctly?
I think it's been said quite a lot that compliance is not equal to security, right? So I think that's a very loaded topic, right? Compliance is necessary. but compliance is certainly not equal to sound security practice, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's maybe sometimes confusion between, hey, if we are compliant, that means our controls are operating as efficiently as they should be, and we have no gaps. Whereas that's not really true, right? And you can be compliant, but you may have issues with your tools, and there are so many things, like continuous monitoring, making sure that your tools are operating continuously, effectively. Make sure you're producing the right metrics around your programs to be able to demonstrate that you're covering all of those areas, and then tying that back to your compliance regulations or compliance controls to say yes. Because if you can automate most of those controls, and I'm not saying that I have done that, I think we made a great deal of progress, but we're nowhere near completion. If you can tie that continuous assessment and continuous compliance checks for your security tools, then you can tie that back to saying, yes, at any given point in time, if an auditor comes and asks you to give them artifacts, you can just give them an audit role and let them go and take a look at it at any given time to see that the control is operating effectively.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what you were emphasizing earlier about humility. As you said, just being aware that we don't have enough controls in place and we should be beyond compliance. This is absolutely essential nowadays. With threat actors coming up with new strategies every single day. If you're not agile enough and don't go beyond the basic compliance, it's very hard to.
You definitely have, your program must be built to not do bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You may have a regulatory requirement that says, say, do X, Y, and Z, and you might be able to do that, but there's definitely, you can do beyond that, right? You have to continue to improve, continue to assess your threat landscape, continue to leverage threat intelligence for that specific vertical that you're in, and basically build your identify your gaps and continue to enhance your controls over time.
Exactly. We have a little tradition on our podcast, Aamir, where previous guests typically ask questions for the next guest. So I think our previous guest asked a question that will be quite relevant to you, considering that you also touch upon the negative side of cybersecurity. So the question is, how do you manage stress effectively, both personally and within the team, when it comes to your profession as a CISO?
That's a really good question. Really, really good question. I would be really interested to know to hear from big other security leaders and hopefully future podcasters that come join your podcast, answer to that question. But personally for me, it's more of hopefully finding the time to play soccer. that I love soccer, and do a little bit of gardening. I do gardening for my mom primarily, because she wants veggies at home. So that's how I manage stress. And then obviously, when you have 2 or 3 kids, life becomes really busy. So that's how I deal with stress. And then I do like to travel when I can. Professionally, just going back to what I said earlier, being able to connect with your team outside, just besides the work day to day, being able to find the time to bring the teams, if they're remote, at least once or twice a year, and hopefully more often, to do some team building activities. I think that's a great way of bonding and really getting to know each other. And it also relieves stress and makes people feel like they belong to a higher purpose. I think those are the key things, but it becomes more and very, very difficult when people are spread out and, you want to get together and, you end up not being able to get everyone to come at the same time because, they have other commitments and things like that. So you're only getting together with the local people sometimes. That becomes really difficult. But, if I could, I would love to bring my team at least on a quarterly basis to get together and just have a team building activity.
I agree. That's what we do here for RSA. It's kind of team building.
That's awesome. Yeah.
What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Ooh, I would love to hear from other CISOs and security leaders, truly their journey between, and I think that's one of your earlier questions of being switching from a hands-on practitioner to a security leader who for me, it was very difficult. It still is. I come from a hands-on background, and even now, I sometimes kind of roll up the sleeves and get into the weeds. But as you sort of grow in your career, obviously you have to start thinking more high level and more strategically, and let the other good team members that you've brought in to let them do the technical work and let them drive the solutions. So, I do still struggle to keep those two personas apart. So I would love to hear more thoughts from other security leaders on that topic of how they sort of delineate between the two roles, especially when you're coming from a hands-on engineering background.
Yeah, I'll make sure to ask them and then come back with the answer to you.
Great. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast, Aamir. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for your very hands-on experience. And I'm sure a lot of security leaders really love to listen to it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And this was really great having a conversation. And I hope our viewers and listeners get to take one or two things away from it. So appreciate your time today.
Definitely.